Hey guys, Adam back here in the Aeroworks workshop, and glad to be back. It's been 1 week since our last live video. As always, we like to give it a couple minutes, let everybody get joined in, get figured out how the live works. The live is on about a 10 or 20 second delay, so if you make comments or that, I don't usually see them for 20 to 30 seconds. We got people joining in here, and like always, we always ask, just drop a comment either on the live chat right now. Drop a comment, just let us know where you're at, what you're building, say hi, where you're from. Kind of lets us know where everybody's dialing in from. Tonight we're going to do just kind of another impromptu build night. We've got the left wing of the Super Duty ready to start closing up, but we've got to get those fittings in that gas tank. I had to drill a couple holes in one of the ribs for the vent line, and I got all that prepped, so you'll be along with us tonight for that portion of the build, and a couple tips and tricks, and we'll show you some up-close stuff. We'll give it a few minutes here, just let everybody join. Decker's Bows is here. How you doing? Sorry you missed last week. Yeah, again, if you ever miss a live, they're live right now, and of course you can comment and get questions answered or ask questions or make comments while we're during the show. If you missed the show, just still click the same link. It takes you back to the video on YouTube where it'll be recorded and stay forever basically on YouTube on our channel. You can watch all the previous lives if you missed something or you want to see something again. Also, all your chat is in there as well, so you can replay that chat live as it went through the video. So as the video progresses on throughout the night and more and more people comment, you'll see those live chat populate. You can also comment after the videos went off live and just been posted to YouTube. You can still make comments in the normal comment section. So if you missed it, or if you have a comment, or you've watched it afterwards and you want to still get a comment in, there's still a chance to do that. It's great if you like and subscribe. Doesn't really matter anymore with YouTube, but hey, it's nice to see some feedback. Looks like we've got 8 or 10 people in here now. Scott K's in there. Hey Scott, good to have you tonight. So like I said, what we're going to be doing tonight, this week, we worked a little bit on the wing, but I put it on the back burner because I was waiting on some fittings, and I got working on my console, kind of figuring all that stuff out, because I'm trying to get to a point where I can really get the engine back from just the testing panel, which I tested in a previous video. You can watch that Viking engine install and first test run. But I want to get it back to a point where now I'm working with the actual final gauges. I've got panel powered up, and I can start working out the sensors on the final panel and all that. So one of those important steps was building and working on the console, which if you look in the media section on the Super Duty build group, you'll see media section. Then you can break it down by like cockpit and wings and fuselage. And there'll be some updated videos in there, or updated photos of the console build. I'm not going to show everything right now because we're kind of doing some new and updated stuff, and it should be pretty cool once you get a chance to see everything. So with that, let's see if we've got any other comments coming in. Nothing quite yet. Again, if you are in there, looks like we've got a few more people than have already commented. Just drop a quick comment. Last week we had Greg, another Super Duty builder, on kind of as a special guest. Appreciate Greg doing that. He's been building basically for about 90 days, and he's got over 300 hours of build time in his Super Duty. He's basically got the fuselage done, he's got the horizontal done, the rudder, he's got both wing skeletons done, and he's working on his wings, so he's really knocking it out. We had him on last week. We did have a question from Fred. Fred's been in the forum a while, and I missed it because it was on a different section of our commenting area, but Fred had a question for Greg. Have you been stuck on any particular task during your build? So Greg, if you're watching, maybe just answer that question or throw a comment out there for any of you that are building. Has there been any one thing that just really got you stuck? I think we've all found times throughout the build where you're just going, the thing's coming together, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I can't do that until I do this, and I can't put this on until this is done, and you find yourself kind of going around in circles. And there were several times I felt that way, and I was just like, at some point you got to just keep moving on and get something done. So there were several times throughout the build where you just kind of, you found yourself at a crossroads, but one thing led to another, and then the build kept progressing. So we are going to jump over to the wing. I'm going to show you what we're doing. Before we do that, a couple things about the fittings. Again, this is pertinent to and specific to the Viking 195 install. We have, for the fuel system and the setup for the Viking engine, we have main fuel lines coming off the tank, as everybody does. We also have vent lines that feed back to the header tank. The header tank gets filled from the wing tank. So the engine is constantly just running off the header tank, and that's a 2.5 to 3 gallon tank that should just always be reading full if we look at the gas gauge. And then our main fuel tanks are running down and filling up that header tank. And in our case, we have the Viking left-right fuel valve so that we can balance out a heavy wing if we need to. We can also set alarms in the dynon to remind us to switch tanks, as you can do in like a G1000. So what we'll be doing is we'll be firing it up on one tank, we'll be switching tanks, but the thing is we're always going to be full on the header tank, which the engine can run about a half an hour off that. So if we see the header tank fuel quantity gauge start to go down and we have full tanks or half tanks in the main tanks, then we have some type of a fuel feed issue we're going to have to address. But so what we're going to be talking about tonight is the vent line connections and the fuel line connections and the fittings that we're using specific to, again, just the Viking engine. So all of the fittings that I'm going to install in the tank, now these are aluminum fittings. They're going into an aluminum tank. I mentioned this before that sometimes those threads on the aluminum tank from Viking are a little bit, I wouldn't say they're messed up, but they need a little bit of a follow through, a little bit of a chase. So if you've got a brass plug or a steel plug, carefully run that all the way in and out again, because if you put these softer AN fittings in there, you might just start cross-threading it right away, and then you're kind of mucking up both sides of the thread. So always a good idea to just run a heavier weight plug or other fitting in there first, make sure they're cleaned up, clean out the threads. And then when we're talking about fuel, we don't want to use Teflon tape or anything like that that can deteriorate, fall off the fitting, get stuck in the fitting and clog up our fuel system. So we are using Loctite 567. You can buy this on Amazon. You can buy little tubes of it. It's fairly expensive. We bought the larger can here, which again will last us pretty much forever, anything we're building on the Super Duty. But you can use this on any of the brake fittings, the fuel line fittings. We never put it on the flare side because obviously the seal is made up from the actual flare on the AN fitting compressing against your either flared hard tubing line, or in our case we have the steel braided lines from Aircraft Specialty. That seal comes from smashing up and making a nice complete surface against there. So you want to make sure on your fittings as well, if you've ever dropped one of these on the floor and you have a slight little nick in there, you're better off saving yourself some trouble and just getting a new one, because if you have a little groove, a little cut, a little dent, that's not going to mate up with the other side of your fuel line, and therefore won't make a good seal. But again, back to the threads on the flare side, we do not want to put any kind of tape, any kind of goo on this side, because that could eventually make its way into the flare side, and then you're not going to have a good seal there. So just on the male pipe side, we're going to put some thread sealant on there. Now this works with fuel, hydraulic, stainless steel, other fittings, high temperature, everything, contaminant tolerant, and so on. Let's see, we got a quick question here. Skip from Pacifica. Electrical wires need to be shielded. Building a Viking 750 stole. Yeah, so the question from Skip, looks like Skip Smith, is do the electrical wires need to be shielded? Well, that depends on what you're installing. In the past, when we used traditional strobes that actually had a strobe light in it, those were very susceptible of causing interference in your radios and things. But with everything being LED, it's not really required anymore. But I do recommend, with the exception of your microphone wiring, so you'll typically buy a 3-conductor shielded, so you'll have a red, black, and a braided wire with a shield around it. With the exception of that one, in today's modern kit plane building, you typically don't need shielded. But again, always consult with your electronics provider to make sure that they don't require something for one reason or another. But if you're using any type of LED lights, they don't have the same issue that the old strobes, the powerful strobes that would go off, those that had a high-powered power supply to power the strobes, those are a whole different ball game. So if you're not using those, don't worry about it. But again, always consult with whatever equipment you're putting in your aircraft. So great question there, Skip. So we're going to move over to the wing. It's kind of tricky because the tank fits exactly into the wing tank bay space, pretty much exactly. By the time you get the cork padding on there and put it in between there, it's almost like you have to drop it straight down. So we can't have the fuel line, the feed side, which is on the inboard lower portion of the tank installed, because it won't fit. So that one we have to leave out. Now what does that leave us? We have two other plugs that have to go in. We have the sump fitting that goes in. That one you can put in ahead of time. You could also put it in afterwards because it's exposed on the bottom of the wing. Mine is already installed. And then you have the vent line side. Now the vent line, because it's on the side, I was able to put the tank in the hole first and then let it drop down. It does require a little bit of flex on that inboard rib, but it does work better because it's kind of hard to tighten that fitting up because it's under a rib angle in there. So I would recommend putting your vent line in, install that first with your sealant, and then swoop the tank into that hole and drop it straight down. So let's jump over to, I've got my 3/4 inch wrench. That's going to work with the fittings that we're using. And I'll take my sealant. I've already cleaned out the threads. I've already did a test fit of everything. So we will jump over to the wing and take a look at that. You can switch. All right, so you can see here we have the tank. I'll go ahead and move the tank just momentarily just to show you the tank bay in case you have not seen that yet. Now I don't have a fitting in here. That's the one we're going to put in here in just a second. And the fill side, this is where the fuel will be coming out of, that's the one we have to leave out. The sump you can actually install or not install because you can still access that. Okay, so this high up shot here, you can see that we've got the tank bay prepped. We've put our cork in there. We've cleaned out the bay. There's no shavings, no pieces of anything in here. And one thing that we did have to do, and if we can go over to this detail shot here, on this rib right here, you can see that we had to drill a hole right here. That is where we're going to gain access to this vent line fitting, which is going to be about right there. Now on my kit, that hole was not there. And we brought this up in a, it's not supposed to be there. It's something that you have to drill out yourself. But after we talked about this in a previous live, Roger from Zenith said that future kits, this particular rib right here will actually have that hole pre-drilled. So that's kind of a nice time savings thing for future builders, because then you don't have to do all the crazy measuring and figure out exactly where that's going to come out. So what we'll do here is we'll put that fitting in here in just a second. I did want to show you one other thing that's important when you're testing your tanks, and that is, especially if you've done the welded in tank fuel cylinders like I did, and I don't know if we can, I'll bring this over here and we'll get a close-up shot of this. I'll move the camera just momentarily here. Okay, everybody see that okay? Okay, good. So right here, this fitting was welded in. I had this welded in by a local welder. Now, Viking, and I believe even Zenith is now carrying these fuel cylinders. They offer this in two options. You can cut the hole yourself and you can rivet them in and then use Pro Seal to seal them, or they make a welded version, which I purchased, and then have either Zenith weld them in, which is probably your best option, or you can weld them yourself or have somebody do it. Now, the hard part is this tank insert is a thicker machined aluminum, and these tanks are very thin. So it's a very tricky weld because you're welding very thin aluminum to thicker, probably 3 times as thick aluminum, and it's hard to get a good weld. On my first tank, when I pressure tested the tank, I had some pinholes. I had some areas after I sprayed soapy water on there, and I had bubbles coming out here. So I actually had to end up pro-sealing over the weld to make sure I didn't have a leak on this. This tank actually did fine, and the O-ring under here worked fine, and I didn't have any leaks around here. So that leads me to talk about the next topic is, well, how do you pressure test this tank? You want to be very careful not to over pressurize it, because you could actually damage or just, you know, deform the tank. So what you need to do is, the first thing you need to do is plug all the holes that are not being used initially. So I'm going to set this up here just for a second. So in my case, we have to plug up the fuel strainer hole. We have to plug up either one of the two, either the fuel line or the vent line. And then the last one is, I thought, well, hey, I will just put the fuel cap on and I'll be good to go. But these are actually vented fuel caps. So even though it's nice and snug, this fuel cap with the holes and just the design of the cap actually allows air into the tank. Otherwise, you'd have a vacuum situation, even if we didn't have the vent line. So you can't just pressure up the tank and keep the cap on, because air will basically leak out the cap. So you have to, you know, take a rubber glove and some tape and seal up this top portion. And then what that leaves you with is one port, either, like I said, either the vent port or the fuel line port, to put a standard fitting into, like this. Okay, and then take one of your fuel lines, and again, you'll have to cover this up with something besides the fuel cap. Then take one of your fuel lines and connect it to here. And then what I did is I made up a little pressure air hose setup. And what this allows me to do is take my air compressor and put it to a very, very, very low setting, like maybe 3 psi or 2 psi. It doesn't take very much. I mean, almost a balloon, the amount of air that comes out of a balloon would be fine. So you really want to check that air pressure before you even connect anything up to your tank. So what I did is I had a regular air hose connection here. I have a valve, a pressure gauge, and then another AN fitting. I put the line between the two blue AN fittings. I checked my compressor several times, made sure it wasn't too high on the pressure, and then just leaked a little bit of air in there until I had about 1 or 2 psi. And you'll actually hear the tank kind of puff up a little bit. And then basically I just checked all of the fittings. I checked all of the welds with soapy water. And basically just sprayed water on it, looked for bubbles, checked it 2 or 3 times. Now you could, you know, some people would say, well, pump it up to, you know, 2 or 3 psi, leave it for several hours, come back, and you should still have the same amount of psi. And that's true too. You could also do that. You know, but for the most part, the tank has been tested at the factory. The fittings is what we're testing. So we want to make sure that our fittings that we put in are not leaking. We want to make sure the fuel center is not leaking, and we want to make sure that the bottom fuel sump drain plug is not leaking. That one at least you can fix if it was, because you might have to replace that down the road anyways. But these other ones are inside the wing and you're not going to be able to get to them. But that's the way I did it. It's not necessarily, you know, the right way or the wrong way. It's just the way I did it. I talked to a couple people. And I tried the balloon method. That didn't really work for me because I couldn't get a good seal on anything. So I went this route and it worked fine. But the main thing is, do not over pressurize this tank. It doesn't take much, maybe 1 or 2 psi. Okay, so let's see here. We're going to, let's see, I'm just checking that. Scott Frost, hey Scott, thanks for joining in. Okay, so we've got our tank. We're going to put this fitting in. We're going to go ahead and get our sealant on here. So what you want to do with this is make sure it's less is more on this. You want to get that excess off there. The main thing we're really shooting for here is we don't want to get any in the threads that are close to you know, the very end of the fitting. So, you know, the first 2, 3, 4 threads, I'm going to go ahead and kind of paint this on. I'm rotating this around. We do want to make sure that all the threads are filled up, but they don't have to be crazy with it, because when you start screwing this in, they're going, this thread sealant is going to run up the threads anyways. Okay, so I even got a little bit more than I like right on this edge. I'm just going to take a little bit of that off there. Okay, so now when I go and run this in, you can see it doesn't take much, but when I start to tighten this in, that thread lock is going to squish out the threads, and it's actually going to be more than I probably need. And this is the one that had the funky threads on it that I had issues with. So again, they don't have to be crazy tight. You know, you want it to be snugged up in there, and you want to see that the threads are, you know, you're turning it in smoothly, and that the thread lock is oozing out outside the threads, and then it should be good. Again, this is our vent line anyways, but obviously we don't want fuel sloshing around in there and coming out. Now that feels pretty dang good to me, and you can see here, make sure we can see that on camera. You can see here that the thread sealant has kind of oozed its way out, and it's almost making like a nice bead around there. This is not going to leak. I can just tell from the looks of it and the feel of how tight it is. Now the tricky part here is that we need to get this into that hole, but also down into this tank bay. Let me show you one other thing too over here. I'll just turn this around for a second. Okay, right here on the inboard side of the tank, you're going to see a little tab with a screw hole in it. This is for essentially bonding or grounding your tank to the airframe. So once we get the tank in there, I will show you on the other side, but your ground from your fuel sender, which is going to ground to the wing rib, will also be grounded or bonded to the tank itself. So you got to have that connection between the tank, which is essentially isolated on the cork strips from the metal. So we need to get this metal tied to the airframe so that the ground, which is the aircraft ground, will then be the negative, and our positive will be our fuel sender our difference with our ohmage on here. So just want to show you that little tab, but we'll show you a close up on that in a second. I'm going to go ahead and turn this back around. Okay, so what we have to do here is kind of get this end pointed into that fuel vent hole, right about like that. There we go, it starts to come out. Now I'm going to come over to the other side here and just give a little bit of outward pull on that inboard rib, and in she goes. And just make sure that it's level and all the way down on all four sides. Take a look at the bottom and make sure your fuel strainer valve is out the right hole there, and that we're all good there. So that is basically what you want that to look like. Now, the other question is, you can see there's a little bit of movement here, because I'm going to need to push that down a little bit to get my fuel line on there. There's also still a little bit of flex right here to where you can get a wrench in here and tighten that up. So just something to keep in mind. This fuel line valve or vent line is in and tight. We now have to do the one that's over here. Now this one consists of the factory fuel strainer. This is that heavy net. It's basically soldered or welded, so it's soldered to a brass bushing. The brass bushing steps down to a AN fitting, which I've now already sealed and inserted into here. And now this entire apparatus goes through the fill line hole and into the tank, which will leave that blue AN nipple hanging out the back for our actual fuel line. So if I bring this over here, bring this a little closer to us. Just make sure that looks good there. Okay, so you can see this hole right here, right there. This basically will go through that hole into the tank, and then it will thread in there like that, and we have space here to get our wrench in here. So that is our next piece that we are going to install. Now I have already taken anything off there. I've cleaned these threads out. Again, when it comes to the fuel side, this is the fuel source, so we definitely want to make sure that we are not clogging up that, clogging anything up there. Hey, Greg C. How's it going, man? I mentioned you earlier in the live. I'll just mention the question again. We had a builder last week, Fred, who asked, "Did you have anything during your build that you got hung up on?" So, anything particular that stood out to you that you just got stumped on or really slowed you down? He had that question last week. I thought if you were here, he'd be happy to answer that question for him. We missed it because he posted it on Facebook instead of on YouTube. So again, we are putting in the fuel strainer slash supply nipple, AN fitting, whatever you want to call it. We are making sure we have those threads coated. If you're just joining us, we're using Loctite 567. It is a high pressure sealant recommended by Viking. They do provide a little bit in their kit with the aircraft. I just bought a bunch from Amazon myself and have it for anything else I need. It can be used on brakes, fuel lines, etc. All right, I got the thread pretty good there. I'm going to feed this through carefully and get those threads started nice, which they're doing. And we're good. Now I just got to get my wrench on there. All right. This is one of those where you gotta, oh, I gotta get a different size wrench. You can just stay over there, it's fine. I forgot with that step down in size, we have a slight change in the wrench size here, so. There we go. This is one of those steps, these things that you're like, man, I'm trying to get this wing closed up, but I can't until I get the fuel stuff closed up, and I can't get the fuel thing until I got the right fittings, and it just seems like things go round and round. But once you've kind of looked at everything, done it a few times, test fit everything, it's time to get off the pot, as they say, and get going. So I'm putting pretty good one finger pressure on here. I don't think I need to go much harder than that. It is good, looks good. I'll see if I can get you a close-up shot here. Are we still on this camera? All right. I don't know if we can see that there. Where are we at? There we go. So we're looking at right down in there where that fitting is. You can see that the sealant has oozed out, made a nice bead around there, and has left us with a nice accessible fuel line, which has a nice fuel access hole right there. So I feel confident in those connections. So that portion is done. Go ahead and close this up. Let me put this back over there. Okay, so the next step, we're going to take our long vent line, again, aircraft specialty, and we are going to feed it. Now this one's a little different because on the right wing, I didn't have all this plumbing and electrical in a lot of the same areas, but I did run it through that rib hole. Now where I'm going to go with the rest of this right now, I may make a change on this wing just because I do have all this extra plumbing over here, but I do know that I do have to go out that hole. So we're going to slightly push down on the tank because it kind of wants to float up a little bit, and we're going to hand thread this on. We want to make sure it's not binding or catching anything. It's turning nice and easy. And good and snug there. And now we will take our wrench and check my size on that. That is guten Tag, as they say in Germany. Now there are torque values you could use on this, but I've had enough experience with flare fittings, I kind of know where that sweet spot is. And since I just put that AN fitting in with the sealant and it's still slightly movable, once I get past kind of that over tight and I start to see the original fitting move, I know that the two aren't really going to move much more than that. So now the next question is on this fuel line, or vent line, excuse me, the one on the other wing, I had it exit right here, and then it ran on the inside of the trailing edge, which I could still do. I'm trying to see if I want to do that or if I want to do something different with where it comes out on the other end. So that I'm going to hold off on because I want to kind of do some thinking on that. It may just end up coming out here, but I want to make sure I have enough room between all the current plumbing. Most likely it's going to just come out here because that's what I've measured for, and this doesn't need to be that far away either. That could be even more like that, or it could even be this under here if it needed to be. So that's the vent line. The fuel side is right here. And again, these have all been measured. Probably go high on that one. Okay, so we got the fuel, the low end inboard side of the fuel tank. This fuel line is going to go through the factory hole right up to the AN fitting with a little bit of an S-bend. Make sure that the AN flare is mated up nicely, and then just turn it by finger tight. It should be very smooth to turn, pretty much all the way up until it's snug. If it's anything other than that, you want to take it off and make sure your fittings are clear, clean, not cross-threaded. Once you bump up flare to flare, you're pretty much almost sealed at that point. But again, we're going to tighten that, and I can tell right there that that's pretty much tight all the way, but I'm going to give it a little bit more. And then when I see that other fitting just slightly start to turn, I know we're good. Now I could check it with I can back up this other fitting just to make sure, because again, this one has that kind of bushing on there. That is good and snug right there. So now we have a grommet that will go on here that will protect this line. This line will essentially turn like this and exit the wing root. And then we have a little bit of play in here to where we can make it shorter, pull it a little bit longer, but basically these have all been kind of designed to fit the length, because this back spar, this is where it mounts to the aircraft, and we have essentially a fuel and vent line nipple sitting right here, so there should be no reason this won't reach. So that is the fuel line, the supply line, and the vent line for the Viking engine with the tank installed. We have the fuel cylinder installed. We leak checked everything, and basically the only thing I personally need to do on mine is just verify the exact routing of how I'm going to do that, which I probably won't do in this video, but I want to make sure to, it's probably going to be similar to the very first one. So if you watch the first one or watch any of those videos, that's the way we're going to route that one as well. This is your last chance to kind of clean the tank or clean the bays out, check everything. If you've made any clean out holes, just go back through, vacuum everything up, get all the chips out of there. The other thing I need to do on the nose side, which again I'll do off video, but is our landing light that we have, the factory, what is it, the micro sun I think it is. We'll basically take that wire, make a little hole in the leading edge nose rib skin, and we'll pop that out so that it's accessible for the slats. And then we can basically give it a one more once over. We're going to go through every rib, rivet, nut, bolt, washer, in every bay. And when I did mine, I actually videoed it all, so I had a good record of it. So I took my video, my phone, and I videoed all four corners, top, front, back, top, bottom, inside and out, looked at every hole and worked my way, you know, from one end to the other. And that way, if you forget something, like, man, did I put that nut on there? Well, at least you can go back and look at that. Good thing is most of the important spar stuff was done at the factory, with the exception of the spar extension tip. So, you know, that part's done. You do have the strut bracket that you install and torque down to the right values, put your torque seal on there. And other than that, you're going to have rivets that, you know, you may have a couple open rivets that aren't done yet because you're putting on your jury strut brackets or something like that. Just make sure everything lines up and then it's ready to go before you start putting the top skins on. So my next task with this wing, basically, besides the fuel line routing, is going to be the wire for the landing light, opening up the nose ribs one more time, give it one more once over, clean out any chips, wipe it down, make sure it's good. I'll put the skins on, the outboard, the inboard, or the tank skin. I'll rewrap the nose, cleco it all down tight, and start riveting. And then this wing will basically be done and into the wing rack. And then it's basically just slats and ailerons or flaperons, and all the components to the Aeroworks Super Duty will be complete. That will take us back to finishing our engine connections and all of our final electrical wiring, most of which we have prepped. I highly recommend going through if you're using Dynon, for say, a lot of people are, I am, if you're using Garmin. Both of those websites, both of those companies have a lot of good information on their websites, all the wiring schematics. For me, with the Dynon HDX, they have the install manual, and they have the just the one-line schematics. Let's see, we got a couple more questions here. Deciding on avionics and wiring really slowed me down. Weeks of research for sure. Things to think about early in the build. Yeah, definitely. Kent said, yeah, that was something we did. When we decided to go Dynon, we obviously looked at the components, we looked at the costs, we looked at the one-line diagrams, we looked at the ease of, reviews and everything. A lot of people had been using Dynon, and I think they're probably one of the most innovative companies out there. Especially when you're talking about this type of aircraft where you can really customize all the inputs. I know Garmin does that as well. And for some of you that are building more of an IFR platform, you may just want to keep it all Garmin, because you've got a, GN 650 or 750, and that's the way you want to do it. And Greg says, am I going to leak check now that you have the fittings or hoses on? Yes, I definitely will. It's going to be exactly like I talked about maybe before you joined. Where we'll basically put a plug in one end, and then we'll put those, my air fitting that I made up, the little air contraption, and then we'll check all those again with soapy water and such. So yes, we will check those again. The main thing was checking those fittings because of the threads, the dissimilar threads on the tank itself. They were kind of, maybe from being welded in, maybe there was some splatter in there, I don't know, but they needed to be cleaned up. If you have like a tap or something, that would probably be the easiest way to do it, but definitely running an old fitting or maybe a brass fitting or even a steel fitting just to clean those threads out, wipe it out. And I don't know if I talked about cleaning out the tank last week, but I'll mention that again, in that when the gentleman who welded in my fuel cinders cut the big 2-inch or whatever size hole that is in the top, maybe it's 3-inch, he did his best to shake out the shavings, but because the way that the tank's formed, it's got those little teeny corners where it's rounded for strength, you know, shavings and stuff stuck in there. And when I would stand the tank up and shake it and kind of tap it on the ground, I had a pretty good hand size full of metal shavings. So you don't want to just stick a shop vac in there, because you can actually suck that tank closed like a soda can. So what I did was I left all of the holes open, left the caps off, left the plugs out, and I went through the fuel cylinder opening. I taped a small rubber hose onto my big shop vac, so I had plenty of space around it, and I just kind of like a dentist used it to suction out little bits at a time until that tank was clean. Now we have both the fuel strainer that comes from Zenith, then we have 2 or 3 more fuel filters on the Viking system. We have a fuel filter going into the header tank, we have another fuel filter on the way to the engine, so there's about 3 filters at least that the fuel has to go through before it's going to get to the engine, so I feel pretty good there. I think we're caught up on the questions there. Oh, Greg says dual sticks, flap around control horn, I missed drill. Yeah, so I guess that is your question to Fred's question about any difficulties throughout the build or anything you had specific issues on. Yeah, I don't know what the percentage is. I want to say it's probably like maybe 5 or 10% of people go with the dual stick option. It definitely looks cooler, and if you're going to do it with the throttle in the middle and the stick, that's definitely the way to go. For me, I thought because the design was based around the center stick and the fact that the Super Duty sits up so high, to have one more thing to hurdle over for me was a little bit tricky. I didn't want to do that. I have seen somebody actually do a quick release where they had like one of those push pin where they can take the stick out, get in, put the stick in, put the push pin in. Obviously, that's a safety thing. You want to make sure you get that right. But so yeah, I know that there's a little bit of extra work when it comes to the dual sticks. And in fact, Greg mentioned that last week on the live that that was about the only thing he had been missing in his whole kit, was just a few little spacers or washers for installing the dual sticks. So any other questions, guys? We still have 15 or so people on here right now. I know that's not a lot in YouTube world, but it's good for this live that's very, very specific to one thing. Again, we're doing these videos mainly because we like to talk to the community. I'm also documenting my build. This is the way that I'm documenting it, like some people might doing with a photo album, with a bunch of pictures. I have videos of everything. I have thousands of photos on my phone. A lot of those photos are on the Super Duty page, which we can throw a link up to on there. But yeah, the main reason we do it is just for fun. It's definitely not for any kind of huge YouTube payout, that's for sure. It's never been that. I remember when I started my YouTube channel back in, I think it was like 2006, I was doing a lot of drone stuff, RC modeling, and I was flying at the time, and I was actually starting to film some of my first flights. This was even before some of the good GoPros came out. I had like an old camcorder clamped to my dashboard. But my thing was just like, man, if I could make on YouTube 1 hour of flight, if I could rent a plane for 1 hour, at the time that was probably, $100, $140 a month. I thought if I can get to making $140 on YouTube, man, I'll be able to go fly for 1 hour when I was renting planes. So I've achieved that, and that's not a problem. But yeah, I don't make my living off of YouTube, so that's definitely sure for anybody who has questions about that. What Greg said, I'm assuming Scott's talking about, are you going to test the fittings or the dual sticks? I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Scott. But yeah, we will definitely check the fittings before we close it up. So if that's your question, that's what we're doing there. Again, we got a ton of new subscribers, or not subscribers, I guess members in the Super Duty chat or Super Duty forum this last week. It seemed like I had 2 to 5 every single day, which is a little bit higher than normal. So I'm not sure where they're finding out about us, but they're getting here, and hey, it's more people that can post pictures of their build, more people that can ask questions or answer questions. So I think that helps all of us. And as always, I'm always vetting these members to make sure we don't have all the spam and the t-shirt sales and all that stuff. So if something does slip through, there's a way to report those posts to the admin, which is me. So just report it. I can take a look at it and either delete it or ban that person if need be. Again, we put the link to the forum up in the comment section, so if you're not a member, please click that link, join over there. Again, here at Aeroworks on any of our channel, we're not charging for anything. We don't ask for any subscriptions. We do this because we like making videos and we like aviation and we like the community. So if you guys like hanging out with us and joining us, share it with somebody, give it a like to let us know you like it. Leave a comment. That's probably the best compliment you can make. So for that, I'm going to probably start wrapping it up. But again, we are really close to closing that wing up. I would suspect that by the time you see another live, that wing will not be sitting on the table anymore. So we'll finish leak checking those hoses, the fuel and the vent. We'll finish up the vent routing. We will get our landing light wire outside of the leading edge skin. We'll do a final checkout, final cleanup, and then we will rivet that top on, and then we'll get it over in the wing rack with the first wing that we did. And then we're kind of like over the hump and on the way down with the building portion. I know there's a ton to go. I know you guys that are further than me, or maybe you're working your way to me, there's still a lot of things to do. The airframe itself doesn't take, especially the fuselage, doesn't take a long time to build. For the most part, it's just, putting the angle on and riveting it on. It's when you get into the wiring, it's when you get into the cross connects, the figuring out what needs to go where, that you really want to take your time. And, the analogy of how do you, eat an elephant one bite at a time, that's kind of the same thing. If you've got 1,000 wires and you just pop open the hood and you look in and you're like, whoa, how the heck am I going to do that? But that all started with one wire. So one wire from here connects to here. The next one goes from there to there. Label everything, use the right wire, use the right crimpers, the right connectors, and in the end, you'll have a big bundle of wire that you did yourself, and it will work, and everything will be good. So again, guys, I'll run down through the list. Jerry, I believe it was, with Decker's Bows, Scott K, Skip Smith, Scott Frost, Greg C, Kent Berg, Aaron, and let's see, and then we got a bunch of repeat ones in there. So yeah, hope everybody is having a good night. Enjoy your weekend, the rest of it. Thanks for joining us here every week. We appreciate you guys checking us out. And give us a like on YouTube or on the Facebook. Leave a comment either place. We read them both places. And if you ever see me doing something wrong, call it out. I don't care. I'm learning just like everybody is, and I appreciate that. So again, guys, it's Adam in the Aeroworks workshop, and we will see you on the next video.